Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
Aside from a busy and successful career in the music industry, Alex Clare is a passionate fly angler. We'll talk about his fishing timeline, what fishing means to him, and probably a bit about music too. Alex, it's great to catch up. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful. I'm very good.
Good. I'm pleased to hear that. And it sounds like my first question was, where are you and have you been fishing? But having spoken off mic, I get a sense of that. But perhaps you'd like to tell us a little bit about where you are right now and what you've been doing recently in the last couple of days.
Sure. I'm right now in London, but I just spent 3 days fishing the chalk streams a bit further west of here. Started on the Frome and the Piddle in Dorset, and then just had a beautiful day on the Test at the Upper Mill, which was very, very, very nice. Very, real a necessary downtime after a long and cold winter. With I had a great early winter. January, February, I did some great fishing over in the US, but other than that, it's been long and cold. So it was good to get back out on the chalk.
Nice. And you've got a nice little mixture of water there as well. And did you choose that with that in mind? So you thought, right, I'll finish off with the Test, but I'll head a little bit further west and head down there. Was that the sort of plan? You like to mix up your fishing trips?
Yeah, I know that on the Frome and the Piddle, it's mostly fishing for wild fish and really beautiful beats that are not, if there has been a stocking in the past, a few fish knocking around, but mostly it's wild fish. But there's nothing quite like leaning into a big Test fish and bending a rod over after catching little. It's beautiful to catch small brownies and small wild fish. It's a lovely, pleasurable thing. But to see those big fish rise on the Test is an awesome experience. So always nice to finish up on the Test.
And did you find they readily rising, and even on the Frome and the Piddle as well? There was plenty going on.
Yeah, sure. There was a massive Granum hatch, absolutely massive Granum hatch. I've never seen anything like it. It was like standing in a Granum tornado. So just the beginning of the hatch, they were rising very happily. Funny enough, I wasn't catching them on sedge patterns. I was actually catching on a jingler, which I guess, I was speaking to my friend Sean Morrissey about this, and we decided that maybe they look a bit like an emerger because the back end of the fly is so heavy that it kind of sits down in the water and may look like an emerging Granum. But yeah, I had a great day. That's
one of those great things about fishing when you chat with a friend about, and you're trying to figure out what has happened and why a particular fly works. And I like that call on the jingler as well, with the back sitting a little bit lower. And as I'm sure you well know, with Granum, it's the emerger they're more locked into. And it sounds as though you called that.
Well, I found that out this trip. I definitely figured that out this trip, that it's they're smashing the emergers. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, nice. And it's been a funny one because certainly for me, I've been looking at, the typical early rivers, the Usk, and people, when they timed it right, were catching some wonderful fish over there. And certainly down here, it's taken a little bit of time for things to warm up. It always does anyway. But you sort of look at pictures out there and see people are having fantastic days on the river, and you're sort of kind of, come on fish, where are you, and I do it every year, and that's the real fun about it. And yesterday, seeing, for me, I sort of wrote a piece on my personal Facebook about, I walk my dog through the village and how things felt different, and I saw a fish consistently rising, and I thought perhaps this is the moment. I was going to go after we did this interview. The rain's come, so I've decided I went yesterday in the end, and lo and behold, they were rising. And it's lovely to see those moments and to see those rising fish. And we talked about the chalk streams, and you talked about the Test, and off mic we were talking a little bit. And it is something special, isn't it, when you step out and see the river in places like that for the first time, and then you see those rising fish, you think, yeah, I'm in the right place.
Sure, it's a good feeling. It's one of the best feelings there is, I think. It's right up there. It's right up there in terms of salubrious moments. Very, very, very special. Yeah. And see, any fish rise is good, but sometimes when you see a real beast rise, it also gives that extra level of little adrenaline rush in the heart and a little bit of a serotonin fix in the brain. And yeah, definitely does the job.
Yeah, no, I loved it, thoroughly enjoyed it, and my dog did too. And I
Good.
put a beautiful picture of him. Look, he loves to see the fish. He doesn't nip them or anything like that. And I had a nice fish for Devon standards, about 1.5 pounds. And I've got a lovely photo of him just looking at the fish. And he likes to see the result of what all the kerfuffle in the river's about, and me getting
Sure.
excited and everything else. And I think if we lose those feelings, we got to sort of look at things slightly differently or look away from it. And I don't know, do you feel as passionate as about fishing as you always have done?
It's, it waxes and wanes. I started fishing when I was very, very small. Um, and, on the day of my wedding, my mum actually told my wife, she said, listen, watch out for his like fishing to living ratio. Like you'll know exactly where he's holding emotionally if you gauge how much he's fishing. And she's 100% correct. For me, it's always been the go-to, medicine, so to speak, if anything, and there's been any pressure or and also just in terms of like setting up goals and targets in my own life, there's always been a list of things I wanna do, and most of those involve some kind of fishing. It's always been that way. Yeah, but it does wax and wane. We prioritize other things in our life, but I think fishing has always been a very strong baseline in mine. I think yeah, since I was 4 years old.
Yeah, the reason I ask that question is that I feel my life is so deeply entrenched in fishing, and I felt
For
a
sure.
little disconnected from it just a little bit recently. And then, like you say, back on the river yesterday, it was the river I know and love. And then you just suddenly, like you say, you get that little rush, that little high. And it's just the river I fish a lot of the time. But I still, every time I go there, it's different. And it's been tough this year, I have to say, for whatever reason that may be. But then you have a magical day. And I had a nice fish, snipped off my fly and thought, yep, that's fine. And it's like you say, it tops you up and I feel connected again. But it's wonderful what you said about your mother telling your wife at the wedding and stuff like that, and fishing from the age of 4 as well. So where did that begin for you at 4? Is it something that's been passed down through the family? Do you have a family member who fishes?
So my mum and dad got divorced when I was quite young. I was about 4 years old, and my dad does not fish. My dad doesn't fish at all. But his father fished, and I used to occasionally go when I was a little kid with him. We never caught much. Um, but I think from the father bonding experience I had with my dad as a kid, he would take me because he knew I loved it. So he always, always found a good excuse to go, I was of course fishing at that time. My first real fishing experience, I think, when I actually caught, I went on a family vacation with my, to Florida, and I think it must be a story that a lot of people share. But my mum found just a little fiberglass, cheap Walmart rod in a cupboard, and we had a saltwater canal out the back, and I think she just put a bit of like some kind of deli cut meat on a gold safety pin with a bit of green garden twine and tied it onto the end, and dropped it over the side of this stock and just hooked into something, and the whole thing bent over, and the pin bent out, and the fish sort of whatever it was just sort of whoop, swam away. And I remember just this feeling of exhilaration of seeing this mysterious thing come up from underneath me, eat this bait, and then quickly scarper off. Thinking back, it was probably a sheep's head. After spending a bit of time fishing for sheephead in the US, but never really knowing what that fish was. My mum then quickly ran to the local, tackle shop, of which in Florida there are millions, and bought me a very cheap little setup. And I remember just that whole holiday, I just sat on that dock and just pulled out, little snappers and catfish and all kinds of crazy stuff. And I just got hooked, for want of a better cliche. Um, yeah, and then from then on, it just obviously through my childhood, there was a lot I grew up in southeast London, and there were a lot of sort of carp lakes and a few rivers as well, a few chalk streams, which I only know about the chalk much later in life. Um, but obviously the Darren and the Cray and all those rivers that are down there, fishing for chub and Also fishing the canal when I moved to northwest London, fishing on the canals and the lakes around North London. It just always was something there. And then later on in my early 20s, um, I started fishing for sea bass very actively. I got very into fishing for bass along the south coast of the UK, and I just got bored of chucking. I could say such a thing. I got bored of chucking poppers, surface poppers at bass, which is incredibly fun. Incredibly fun fishing. But just wanted a challenge. I wanted to get a better presentation, so I started, researching and looking into fly fishing, and definitely got caught, the clouser bug and the deceiver bug, and that was that.
Nice. And it's funny, you go
Yeah,
to that first fish that you hooked and lost. Isn't it amazing how we always remember that one that got away?
yeah, for sure. I've had a few, had a few moments where I've sort of just held my head in my hands and thought, I can't believe I just lost that. It seems to happen at least a few times a year. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's sort of, to me, your route into fly fishing is sort of, we think of the traditional route via, perhaps it might be a still water, then it might be a reservoir, it might be a river. And I would call your route a more modern one, I guess,
I
into
think so.
fly
Yeah.
fishing. And I had Paul Jennings on here, who is a mullet king and bass king as well with the fly rod, and he came in a similar way. Did you find that was there much when you were doing that? Was there much of a scene that you could lock into at the time to learn a little bit about saltwater fly fishing?
Not so much, actually. There was, it was not the early days of the internet by any means, but there was definitely most of the research was done on there. There was very few people doing. A lot of people lure fishing for bass, but fly fishing hadn't quite. A few people chucking a fly, but I didn't see many people. Sometimes down around sort of the Beachy Head area, you'd occasionally see along the breakwaters down there, someone with a fly rod. Um, but it's quite solitary fishing, bass fishing, so we sort of give each other distance and space and understand. Okay, maybe we'll talk to him another time if our paths cross. But yeah, it was quite lonely, and I think I still have a lot of very bad casting habits from those from those early days. Yeah.
Because I guess as well with saltwater, you've got the wind to deal with. You have got, you want to get distance as well. So you're sort of, in some respects, going in at the deep end, aren't you? That you have got to learn to double haul. You've got to be able to throw it a little bit longer. Was that a difficult process for you, or you just sort of figured it
Very,
out as
very
you went along?
difficult. Very difficult. Was very lucky fishing on the Sussex coast that the fish are not far out. You're not casting a great deal of distance, and if the fish are chasing bait, which is usually when you're going to be catching the bass anyway, the bait is coming very close to the shore. You see the sort of spray of, white bait all over, the south coast beaches at certain times of the summer, where you see those fish are getting hammered by either mackerel or bass, or scad, which was also an interesting fish to catch on the fly. And they always seem to be in and amongst the bass and the mackerel. Um, but so thankfully for that reason, I didn't have to cast great distances. Still don't really like casting great distances, but you could usually see where the fish activity was. The fish would make themselves known back then. I haven't fished that part of the UK for a long time, unfortunately, so I don't know what the fishery's like now, but it was in very good shape. Um, you know, 12, 13, 14 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you remember that moment when that first whack of your clouser or deceiver? Do you remember that first fish
For
and
sure.
when it came
For
to
sure.
life?
For sure. For sure. It was actually on my second trip with the fly rod, actually. And there was the bait right, like I said, right by the surf line. And I just chucked the clouser into that breaking water. And, it shot off with a little fish of just under a pound. But it was, great take. And they have such spirit, bass. They really, they give it their all for the few moments at the beginning. They tend to mellow out a little bit after after a few moments, but that initial run is always, you know, takes the wind out of you a little bit.
Yeah. And so did you stick with the salt water or did you move inland and
No,
go
I
the reverse route?
got got into still water fishing as well because it was just provided a respite, and the tackle just seemed a little bit lighter. I was fishing with a 5 weight as opposed to the 8 weight, and using much smaller flies, and it seemed a little bit more delicate. And it provided a different type of fishing. Also sight fishing as well. Even a lot of still waters, you're still looking for fish activity, and maybe not a rise in the sense that I was looking for on as I've started looking for when I fish rivers for trout. But it was just a refreshing. It's a prettier type of fishing. Fishing on fresh water, and your hands aren't as sore at the end of the day. When you're fishing the sole, everybody gets a little bit itchy, irritated, and I don't think we're meant to be exposed to that level of exposure for great periods of time. So the still water trout fishing definitely stepped in. And then fairly soon after, river fishing for trout. It seemed like a good progression. As my career advanced, my budget got a little bit bigger. So I didn't have to be limited to free fishing or day ticket fishing. I could start looking more for trout on the chalk.
Yeah. And was that sort of a bit of a tipping point for you then, moving from still waters to rivers? Did you think, actually, this is more for me? Or did you sort of flirt with the two for a bit?
I think because I have a background in sort of carp fishing and freshwater fishing as a kid, one of the turning points for me was back then when I realized that you'd have these sort of groups of men who go carp fishing and spend all their time chasing a certain fish. But the fish is not wild. It was put in there by somebody. And the whole system has been so managed. And I think the idea of fishing a river for wild fish just seems so much more natural and so much more special. There's just a magic to it. When you fish a stock lake, you know exactly what's in there. There's no surprises. And you think about sea trout and their timeline and what they go through, the adventure of a little brown trout, what he goes through in life. It's a little bit more awe-inspiring. Than I love getting a bend in the rod, and I'll fish for anything. Tell me there's fish somewhere, and you tell me how to catch it. I will try my best to do it because I'm still a little 4-year-old boy sitting on a dock deep down inside. But this has to be a change after a while. Chasing after stockfish, whether coarse or salmonoids, can get a little bit monotonous.
Got you. And you talk about your coarse fishing background there. My friend Perry is from that background as well. As a result of that, do you tend to be a little bit more of a tinkerer and a thinker? And he's always got, well, I've got this fly that I think will sort this. Do you see some of that coarse fishing thought process spill over into your fly fishing as well?
A little bit pedantic. I think so. Yeah, you always want to know that what you're, scaling everything down is very, very normal to people who coarse fish. Getting away with as light as you possibly can. I remember once fishing a still water for trout and using like a very, very light tippet, and I was fishing a little buzzer, and I remember catching a bunch of fish when no one else was, and I remember someone asking me like, what tip are you fishing with? When I told them, they were horrified. They're like, what are you doing? Do you actually want to land any of these fish? So yeah, there is a little bit of that, idea of sort of scaling things right back. Yeah.
It's interesting. I think I like fly fishing because of the simplicity of it, but I greatly admire people who drill down on what, and I like to understand why I've caught a fish, but I also like you say, you don't know what's going to be out there, and you see a rise and you think that might be a nice fish, and you make a nice cast and catch it. But I don't deep dive too much beyond that. Sure. I think I probably do, but I'm trying to convince myself sometimes I don't. Yeah, absolutely. So you've made that reverse move, I guess. And so I was going to ask you about your favorite discipline of fishing, but I guess, would that be freshwater trout fishing, or would it be a bit of saltwater in the Keys or whatever?
I love fishing. I'm not fussy. I spent a lot of time in the Middle East in Israel, and there's not a lot of things you can target with the fly. I mean, there's a lot of catfish, sharp-toothed catfish, African cats, which are awesome fun. Really awesome and fun, and obviously carp as well on the fly. You can catch them, which is awesome. Also, they really go off like stink. Um, and I spent a lot of time chasing those. Also, there's a lot of sort of panfish, tilapia, things like that, which I spent a lot of time fishing, as well as also barbel. Um, Love fishing out in the US, especially down in the Gulf. I haven't spent too much time in the Keys actually. Just I'm going. I was in earlier in the year. I was in Louisiana, and I'll be going back there in May. I hope to spend another few days out there chasing redfish. They're just awesome. That's a newfound passion of mine. I really just was blown away by the fishery out there and by all the wonderful the diversity of what you can catch um in the sort of Louisiana bayou slash marshes. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to fish. I mean, one thing I've never actually pursued actively, and I really, really want to get into, just because there's nothing that quite inspires as much as the word salmon, and it's just something I haven't had the time to try and fish it for yet. So that's definitely on the list. But yeah, I mean, fishing's awesome, isn't it? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you're catching as long as you're catching.
I like that. I like that. It is all good. That's what I've always tried to say. It's interesting you talked, and I wanted to learn a little bit about redfish as well, but I was thrilled that you've written a piece for us for Fly Culture about your trip to Louisiana, which the timing was perfect because somebody contacted me saying how much they loved the magazine, but could they have a tiny bit more salt water? So the timing for that was absolutely fabulous. Tell me about redfish, because I've seen them. It's a fish that's not been on. Been on my radar for many, many years, but I've not been lucky enough to catch them. Explain to me a little bit about them and what they mean to you, and how you've enjoyed fishing for them, and how you describe them, I guess.
Wow, redfish they're beautiful creatures. They're a type of drum. They don't know called the redfish. They should be called goldfish. There's a few different types of drum that live in the Gulf of Mexico. They provide sort of the most frustrating and rewarding fishing of all the sort of fish I've ever targeted on the salt. In Louisiana, they tend to get very large. For some reason, in Texas and in Florida, they don't get that big, but for some reason in the marshes, they just get absolutely huge. And when you see them, they appear out of nowhere with this little wave of the tail, sort of coming out of the water and notifying you of their presence. And it's just very exciting fishing. They eat crustaceans mostly, and they sort of root around on the bottom. I've heard of people catching them on the top, on poppers and things like that. But when I was targeting them, I was fishing with very, very large streamers that weighed. They're so heavily weighted to get them down. Again, it's shallow water, but they do fish hard. They do feed quite hard to the bottom usually. So that's part of the game, is getting their attention. But once you're hooked into them, they're rockets. They're rockets that, well, I guess rocket powered steam trains is probably a better way to describe them. They're really just dogged, powerful fish, and a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
Nice. Nice. No, they're on the radar. And I like the sort of slightly unsung heroes, and I've talked before on here, like snook. I think snook is a really cool fish as well. And I think, although there's obviously a big redfish scene, over here they're not as recognised quite in quite the same way, and I think that's definitely one that I'd be super excited to go and target one day. I think it was a fish that was nearly wiped out, wasn't it? It was commercially fished and nearly wiped out.
They have a evolutionary flaw that they're quite tasty. so a lot of people have fished for them for food, and the few contacts I've made out there, the skippers who I know out there, they are fighting tooth and nail to encourage catch and release, because there's, although catch and release, we associate it very much with America, and I think of, the sport fishing that's gone on in the US, but there is a pressure as a commercial fish species. People are eating them. The people I know who are there are trying their best to encourage catch and release. And one of the beauties of social media is that you can do that. You can you can encourage people on social media to just see those pictures of fish going back. It has a huge influence. If you have a person who's getting X amount of clicks on his profile a month, he sees them. The majority of things are, well, the only photos that they have include a photo of someone putting a fish back in the water. I think it's very encouraging. So yeah, they were nearly wiped out, but they're making a comeback. I mean, we didn't struggle to find fish. We struggled to get them to eat, but you don't struggle to find them. We had a very good skipper, a friend of mine called Ron Ratliff, who's out there. He's become a good friend. And a real good old boy who really knows those marshes intimately. So yeah, looking forward to spending a bit more time with Ron out there and catching a few more.
Nice. And do they pole them? And I guess there's no way you can get out, is there? You're fishing
Exactly.
from the front of the boat, as it were.
It's all on a skiff. It's all on a skiff. There's no other real way to do it. The water there is the bottom is so muddy that you have no way of catching them any other way. I said to him, should I bring my waders? And he was like, you do not want to step off the skiff. You'll sink very quickly into this deep, marshy mud and get eaten alive by shrimps. So, there's no other way than skiffing around. And it's remarkable watching people who work those skiffs, pushing into the tide, into the wind, holding these boats through the marshes. Very inspirational. Hard work. Those guys deserve every penny that they get because they work really hard to put people on fish. It's really tough work, and I think very meaningful. I think every fish that they put someone on gives them such a sense of joy. I mean, it's great.
Yeah, I know what you mean about poling the boat. I've done a little bit of it, and it's exhausting. And yes, anyone who can do that on a daily basis has my huge and very, very deep respect. But yes, one day they will come onto the radar for me. I hope one day they will, but we shall see. But you'll be able to read about it in an upcoming edition of Fly Culture as well. But I wanted to move away a little bit, and we often talk about the benefits of fishing from a mental health perspective, but do you also find it useful from a creative's point of view, i.e. that it clears the mind and let you look at things from different angles?
The beauty of fishing is it does clear the mind, and often when you're a creative person, you're thinking so actively about how to create and how to make, and it is nice to just switch off, and I think fishing really provides that switch off, which is essential. It's really, really important to just disengage from the world around us and engage with something that's much more real in a way. When you're creating, it's very abstract. A very abstract process of refining and processing thoughts, and it's all in the head and in the heart. And to be engaged with your environment and to be a part of the environment when you're fishing in that way is a big relief from the tormented artistic mind. That's always trying to figure out a way to, create or make something. It does definitely provide a little bit of respite from that. And I think that helps the creative process because it gives you a little bit of time to just switch off and disengage, which is, so important.
Yeah. And have you found then that you've written songs during or after a day's fishing? Are you the sort of person who comes back and says, yeah, that's cleared my mind now, I've got something here? Or will you immediately you might be on a riverbank or on a skiff or whatever and something comes to you? How does that process work for you?
I think often when fishing, the usual thing I'm thinking about after fishing is more fishing. To be honest, after day's fishing, I'm like, I just want to go fishing again. What am I going to do? How am I supposed to go create music? It's very rare that I walk straight into the studio after a good day's fishing. I usually have a nice dinner and go to bed and feel very relaxed. When traveling for work, so obviously when I do most of my fishing to justify a big trip, for me usually comes in tangent with a work trip. And as somebody who travels all over the world for their work, it really helps. But I don't think I've ever written a song on the bank. Not yet. Anyway, maybe maybe sometimes you get inspiration from what you see on the riverbank when you see the natural world in any of its stages, it can be very inspirational and gives you food for thought, which can lead to a song. But no, I don't know if I've ever had directly a bit of inspiration that's come during a fishing trip.
And I've wondered, I've been sort of talking to guests on here, creative guests like yourself, and I recently had the artist David Miller on, and we were talking about the mindset for creativity. And in my small way of writing and in his career as a painter, and we sort of went round and talked a little bit about the mindset when you're doing that. We sort of felt that almost it was when you were in a slight downswing that you felt more creative rather than happy and euphoric. What sort of mindset? Yeah.
So I think he's correct. I think, there's a propensity for artistic people towards the melancholy. And it's usually when we're thinking the most, isn't it? When a person's thinking and is emotionally charged about something, uh, when people are happy, we're usually quite distracted. Keep people happy and satisfied, and you can, get them to do almost anything happily and calmly. But when someone is stressed or depressed or melancholy, it does do something creatively. It gives a push to release something, and that push to release can create some very, very powerful things. In my experience, I think most of the songs that I've written that have been successful are usually about overcoming some kind of struggle. Yeah, for sure. The struggle is definitely part of the process. You don't hear, Van Gogh was clinically depressed. You hear all the amazing, Elliott Smith and these brilliant songwriters and Leonard Cohen. They weren't exactly jolly, jolly chaps. They were definitely going through something to make them create what they created. Yeah, I think for people want to hear pathos, they want to hear empathy, they want to hear something that they can relate to. And usually that relatability in a song comes through some kind of trauma or some kind of stress. That's what everyone wants to know. They're not alone in the trenches.
Yeah, yeah. And do you feel then when you're in that zone, if that's the correct term for it, that everything flows out very, very quickly? Does that process happen quickly for you, or do you still need to come back to it?
It used to be when I was starting out, I was writing constantly, and music would come to me in the middle of the night, and lying in bed at night and sitting on the couch, I just had these ideas that would pop into my head, and then it became very much a job. When it becomes a job, you have to realize, okay, now I have to set time to be creative. I have to, I've got a young family, and it keeps me quite busy. And to be creative, I have to set. I tend to work in like 4-hour stints, but I have to make that time to sit down behind a piano or with a guitar or with a computer open and just try and create something. Then it never was like that in the early days. It would just come randomly. But I guess as time progresses, it's not sustainable to to live like that. Get ideas, and thank God for the smartphone, because you can like hum a voice note or write an idea down very quickly in your WhatsApps, and say it's going to be there for later. So that does happen.
Yeah, nice. So, and you talked about when you're working, I guess when you mean you're touring and playing your music around the world, does that mean that you do try and look out some fishing when you're there? And if you do, because it sounds like you do anyway, but if you do, where is the best that you've had? What has been the most notable day that you've had when you've been on tour?
Wow. The funny thing is, the US is full of little pockets of water, and Europe is also full of little pockets of water and rivers. And you can down in Bavaria, there are a lot of streams. And I spent quite a lot of time in Germany, and especially down around the Munich area, there are beautiful, mountain runoff rivers and lakes. Also fishing up in Zermatt. There's a huge loch, for want of a better word, by the Matterhorn in Switzerland. And there's, a few wild fish in there and a few stock fish in there as well. So when I played the Zermatt Unplugged Festival, there's always a bit of fishing that goes on there. I think I'm one of the only people to go fishing at the Coachella Music Festival. There's a lake in Coachella full of smallmouth bass, which I was catching on a spinner in 2000. I think I played there 2013, 2014. Also Tempe, Arizona. fishing there right by the music venue. There's the Tempe Lake, which is again a good bass lake. Um, so quite a few memories of being on tour, and I always take a couple of rods with me. Because you never know what you're going to find out there, and there's invariably some kind of fishing tucked away somewhere. We're going to New York at the end of the month, and also going to Connecticut for work. And I know there's a good bit of trout fishing in Connecticut, and certainly in the Catskills. So I've never fished the Catskills before, so that's definitely on the list for my next trip, is to find a bit of fishing out there. Yeah, it'd be an adventure.
Nice. And have you ever actually fished the day of a concert?
Have I? Yeah, I have, for sure, for sure. But the place in Tempe, Arizona that I mentioned before, I fished the day of the concert. Yeah, it's great. A lot of fun. You're just aware that you have to make sure you get a good shower in afterwards and
Yeah.
change your clothes. They're only covered in like bass lime down your trousers. It's not really a good look.
Yeah, I guess when you're holding the microphone and you can smell the bass or perhaps grayling or whatever it is, that must be a nice little reminder. But I guess your mind's probably elsewhere at that stage. But it must be sort of kind of strange going from being in our solitary pastime to then all of a sudden standing up in front of thousands and thousands of people. Do you find that helps to have that time beforehand as well?
It's actually a very similar feeling, weirdly. I was just thinking the feeling between casting a fly and being totally focused and engaged with what you're doing, and looking and analyzing and feeling and processing, that whole process is actually very similar to performing a concert. The only time I feel I'm fully engaged in life is when I'm fishing or playing. That's the time we're just sort of rolling through and hoping for the best. But I know when I'm fishing and when I'm performing or when I'm playing, I'm really engaged 100% with what I'm doing. I'm 100% there in mind, body, and spirit. Yeah, so maybe that's why I like I like playing music and I like fishing, because it's just time to be totally engaged.
Nice. And how do you feel? What is it like from that moment when you actually walk onto the stage at the start of a concert?
Mm. It's a great feeling. It depends on the crowd and it depends on the concert, but it's a very validating feeling when you walk on the stage and there's a few thousand people or a few hundred people or a few dozen people. It doesn't matter, but we know they're there to engage with you and to hear you. And when you write a piece of music and then 6 months later you've got a room full of people singing it back at you, that's a good feeling. It's up there. There was a band called the Cramps, who are a punk rock group, sort of punk rock, a bit rockabilly-ish. And Lux Interior, the lead singer of that band, they were playing right until he passed away, quite young, in his early 60s. The rock and roll lifestyle isn't exactly the healthiest or the best for longevity. But he was asked, in his 60s, like, why are you still doing this? You could have retired a decade ago. And he said, it's hard, when you walk into a room and you've got all these people shouting, I love you, I love you, I love you. It's quite addictive. Now, I think we realize that it's very superficial, and there's a part of the creative process and the image that people will engage with. But that aside, it is a very nice feeling to know that people are enjoying what you're doing. It's a good feeling to play live. I mean, I love recording and I love writing. I love the challenge of creating, but there's something very, very special about performing live. As I said, it's one of the only times I really feel fully engaged with what I'm doing. And that's a good feeling.
And to reach people in such a large way, and I was looking at your song Too Close, and I'm incredibly proud of our little podcast, the amount of people that listen to it. And then I saw that Too Close has had 182 million downloads on Spotify.
Yeah.
It must be amazing feeling to know that you have reached so many people in clearly what is a positive way.
Sure, it is nice. And when you write a piece of music and you know that it's been there with somebody when they've been through some traumatic experience, or after a concert you engage with people and talk to people and in the crowd, and they share their stories of when they first heard the song and what they were going through at the time and why it was important to them and why it's meaningful. It becomes a part of their life. It becomes a part of their life experience and part of their memories that are there forever. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing to know that you can engage with people, and if it's 180 million or 18 people or 8 people or one person, if they're having that connection to something you create, it's made it very meaningful, very validating. I think we're always looking for a little bit of validation for what we do and to make sure that it's meaningful. If we have meaning, we can do anything.
Yeah.
That's so important in an age where people are doing jobs which aren't meaningful and do not provide real satisfaction. They're constantly, people are looking for escapism in so many other places, whether it's the screen of their phone or negative habits. People just want to feel alive and they want to feel some sort of pleasure. When you can do that for a job, you get energy from it and you give energy from it, then it's beautiful thing.
Nice. And in our tiny little way as well, I'm similar with our magazine. And when it goes out, that I don't sleep the night before because I'm incredibly proud of it and hope people feel the same way.
I love it.
Thank you. Sure. That's very, very kind. Do you feel the same though if a new album or a single is about to drop, or do you just think this is, yeah.
Yes, 100%. There's different types of releases. I put out a few different songs a year, even my songs or songs of other people, and you're always a bit nervous about how people are engaged. And sometimes you really think this is the one, this is the best song ever, and other songs you think, this is not so special, but for some reason, you don't get to choose who likes your music or what song is like. So it can be. It is a bit of a roller coaster of emotions of successes and failures. Like everything in life, you just have to be, the trick is to just keep putting out. And yes, there will be sleepless nights and there will be frustrations, and there's a learning process with releases. Nowadays everything is algorithm based and making sure everything is hitting the right listeners with the right digital distributors at the right time. It's all very boring, but really important, and making sure your ducks are lined up in a row is important, and that does cause a few sleepless nights. The most important thing is getting people to hear it and hoping that they're engaging with it and loving it. And if they're not, then it's okay. You just hope for the next song. See how it goes. Yeah, so just how it is.
Yeah. And do you think then as creatives that the insecurity aspect of it all, or the worry about it all, is one of the things that helps drive that creative process as well?
I don't know if it does. I think it can be quite frustrating. When I first got into the music industry, my lawyer actually said to me, he said, Alex, you have to know the music business is two things. There's music and then there's business. And it's a real, to have the two existing together, these two very incongruous things, this beautiful creative process mixed with the hard facts of, okay, how are we going to actually make a living out of this? And how are you going to avoid getting absolutely, exploited by a record label or a publisher or somebody? It's real, that is part of it. The music and the business side of things. So I don't know if the business side of things can inspire creativity. I think the frustrations that come from the business side of things can create some level of inspiration and give you food for thought and a lesson into humanity, which is, really what I think songwriting is all about, is finding that lesson in humanity and seeing what makes people tick.
Nice. And you talked about soundtracks, and I told my daughter that I was speaking to you, and she was thrilled, and Too Close and some of your other tunes as well with the background to her university as well. So she was thrilled that I was speaking to you. So that I know that she's one of those people who's appreciated what you've done out there and was thrilled to hear that I was speaking to you. But let's get back to the fishing. And when you go on, you've had these days on the chalk, do you have music on to start a day's fishing or a road trip? And if you do, you've mentioned a few artists there, what might it be?
So I have a very broad taste in music. And when I'm driving, there's definitely different types of driving that one does, and you need different types of music to accompany. I love classical music. I love Chopin. I love Beethoven, and very happy to listen to that to sort of mellow out. But when no one else is in the car, I tend to put on, pretty hardcore punk rock from the 80s and 90s and just blast out as loud as I can. Everything from like Minor Threat to Black Flag to even to sort of metal from the 90s, which is, when I was a teenager. And that definitely makes an appearance when I'm driving. Also there's a few newer bands that I've got into recently that are providing a similar energy to that punk rock energy. Is a band called Idols from, I think actually from Bristol. I may have made that up. But they've been featuring quite heavily on my driving playlists. When I'm fishing, I tend to switch everything else off. My phone gets switched off, my music gets switched off, and I try and just be as present as I can be in the environment. But the pre-fishing and post-fishing drive usually comes with quite a significant. I make different playlists. The beautiful thing about Spotify and Apple Music is that you can make playlists, and you can. It also has some level of AI there that it will predict and help build your playlist for you. Or help you curate some good listening. So yeah, that definitely plays a part on any fishing trip. Is the soundtrack in the drive to the fishing.
Yeah, and do you listen? Because you say you don't listen, but I know some people who will plug in headphones and listen while they're fishing, particularly salmon fishing. I kind of get both angles of it, and with salmon particularly, you've got long periods of nothing happening, so I kind of get that. Yet a bit of punk rock when the line goes tight and comes to life, I think will be kind of cool. So I like that. Yeah, I think that's got potential. I've not gone there. I've explored the idea of it, but I think that might be something that I may look at some stage. Yeah, I love the sound of nature. I love everything else. That background track as well is really good. But yeah, I'm sort of flirting with the idea of salmon fishing, perhaps plugging something in and having a listen to something.
What would you listen to?
I listen to, do you know, it's funny, it can be anything. And I was always, when I grew up, you always sort of listen to something. And it may have been when I was younger, two-tone music. It may have been whatever. I liked, the Specials to me were amazing. And what they did and what they stood for was way, way ahead. And the reggae before that as well. Even a bit of punk, The Exploited, I used to laugh. I thought they were an amazing group. And even latterly, music like, I love a bit, I tell you who sets the tone really well for me is The Who. And particularly Quadrophenia, I think is a great background track to get you going. And then latterly, I love Elbow. I think lyrically, they are just phenomenal. And so, but it can be anything.
I think the eclectic nature, one of the advantages of social media, of smartphones, of all these things is that music was very much tribal. I think fishing also is very much tribal. You do your type of fishing, and that's where you are. You're a trout fisherman, you're a salmon fisherman, you're a carp fisherman. That's who you are. And we look for our tribe, don't we? We're looking for our group where we feel that level of like oneness and sameness. That's very a huge part of human nature. And music is exactly the same. When I was a kid, it was all about hip hop and like heavy metal. And there was there was UK garage scene, and there was the drum and bass scene, and they all kind of people had their little tribe. And then the iPod came along, and it became, it's all right. You don't have to keep your record collection on display anymore. So if you want to listen to Burt Bacharach at 1 minute and then listen to Glenn Danzig another minute, that's okay. That's absolutely okay. No one knows. I've walked through some very interesting places in the world, and I always think about, if people are looking at me, do they have any idea what I'm listening to? If I wasn't mouthing along the words, because now it doesn't really matter, does it? You can get enjoyment from so many different things, and we don't have to have that tribal mentality towards music anymore. We can have very eclectic tastes. If a band like ABBA, who you would never admit as a kid to listening to ABBA. A height of embarrassment to say, "Oh, yeah, I'm listening to an ABBA record right now." It would definitely damage your street cred and integrity. But the beauty of having an iPod or a smartphone is that you can stream whatever you want, and you can appreciate the musical genius of a band like ABBA without having any associations of kitsch that come with it. And I think that's one of the beauties of technology, of social media, is that it breaks down that tribalism in music, in fishing, in whatever it will be, because you have an access point, to everything now. You can learn about anything you want to, and it's a couple of clicks away.
Yeah, I think you've summed that perfectly, because I was trying to think, and I think about my daughter's music career, and like you say, she's from the iPod generation, and her tastes are incredibly eclectic. And I look back and I showed her these things called records when she was young, and you're dead right about that tribalism of a style and hip hop. I'm a hip hop fan as well, and how you discover those and you stuck with that and didn't look outside of that. But like you say, iPod and then latterly Spotify and everything else that came with it allowed us to explore other forms of music. And now I look backwards and think, wow, that was really good, when I may not have listened to it because it wasn't in the tribal music that I was listening to. And then you suddenly think, wow, that was absolutely fabulous. The other word I think allows us to love ABBA is the word guilty pleasure. And that opened the floodgates for everyone to be able to say, actually, it's all right, isn't it?
It's okay.
Like you say,
it's okay. Don't even self-acceptance. I like ABBA.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Yeah. You could sidle up somebody and say, love them. And so it's all fine then from that point of view. So that's bro. That's made it. That's the first time I thought about that, and what you said has made perfect sense. So thank you so much for that. Let's go back around to fishing, and you said where you're based with the local fishing that you do, but do you sort of start the year thinking, I guess for yourself, it's in some respects slightly easier, isn't it? Because I guess you have a tour schedule, so you know where you're going to be. So does that mean you're starting to sniff out fishing there and think, right, okay,
very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. That's very much the case. That I look where I'm going to be, and I figure out, okay, so what's nearby. And it doesn't always have to be within, it could be a day's journey. If I have a couple of days off here and there, which I do often, you're not doing concerts every single day when you're touring. So yeah, I do tend to scout out where I'm going to be, and that does give a big influence to where I'm going to be fishing and how I'm going to be fishing. For sure. That's really the only way. Really the only way I do it. I'm not at a stage in my life now where I can justify shooting off for a week if it's not just a work trip. I think I've got a young family. I've got little kids, and I look forward to the days when I can plan 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks in Montana, and a week in Alaska, and a month in the Bahamas. That'd be great. That'd be awesome. I'd love that. But at the minute, it's just not an option. I have to squeeze in the fishing when I can, and I do as much as I possibly can.
Brilliant. And you mentioned your children there. Do you think they will fish? Do you think you'll introduce them to it?
I've taken them. I have my oldest. She's nearly 9. She's come on a few trips, and she's so engaged with nature. She loves. Whenever there's a log, she'll lift it up and see what's underneath. And whenever there's a snail crawling up her branch, she's totally engaged with the natural world. I took her for a session on the Kennet last summer, and we were watching a trout rising to elder beetles, and watching this trout rise to these beetles, going through the fly box and saying, okay, so what do you think it's going to do if that's what they're eating? And she figured it out. She was like, that looks like a beetle. So I was like, okay, so we'll tie that on, and I caught that trout, and for her it was the real, after casting, watching me cast to it 4 or 5 times, changing the fly, changing the tippet. She was very very engaged, and when it finally the rod bent over, she was really excited that it all kind of worked out. So I think she has a lot of potential. My younger sons, I've taken them and they sat on the bankside. I think right now, they've been fly fishing a few times, and I've taken them to a course lake, to go maggot drowning, and they've caught, and it's great fun, isn't it? It's great fun for kids. But I don't know yet. We'll see. Even though I would go with my grandfather when I was a kid, that's not where I caught the bug. It was really going on my own, later on that really my dad would drop me off by the lake or by the beach, and would go into town, or I like that, that part of fishing, of being alone and experimenting. And I think my kids are just not there yet, and I don't want to push it upon them. They love being outdoors. Every kid loves being out in nature and seeing the world, and I think that's a huge part for me. A huge part of fishing is not just the fishing, but everything that comes with it. Just being part of the environment. A bit of a strange one in that environment, but being engaged in that environment is very much a part of fishing for me, and I think that has definitely rubbed off on my oldest. She definitely gets that.
Nice. Oh, well, I hope that stays with her. And I think I've said on here previously that my daughter, that she used to come all the time, and then I used to take her to the tackle shop and let her choose a few flies, and then it sort of drifted away, and then it comes back every now and again.
Comes back, for sure.
Yeah, I think
that happens.
Yeah,
that happens with us as well. I mean, as a kid, there was definitely the period of like 5 to 11 was like all about fishing. And then my teenage years of, sort of 12 to 18, I didn't do that much fishing. I think I used to do a bit of carp fishing, but I wasn't doing so much. It was really, something happened where you just fall back into it. You realize how much you love it, and all the other temptations of youth and exciting things that the different parties you're going to and the clubs you're playing and this, that, and the other. That excitement starts to dissipate, and you try to go back to the things that you find meaningful. And I think that's pretty natural for young people. When they've grown up fishing, they'll come back to it because it will trigger something that's just that halcyon place of just good feeling. We need that.
Yeah, my only humble advice would be, and I tried with my daughter, is not to force my passion onto her,
yes.
And then just let her drift in and out of it as she wanted to. And she's away from it at the moment, but yeah.
I think that's one of the hard things with fly fishing, is that there is such a technical aspect to it, of learning how to cast, and with little kids it's almost impossible to the patient father to be like, no, this is never going to work. So I think it does. It's I'm waiting for my boys to a little bit bigger. I often will cast out for them, with a little indicator or something on it if it's on still water, and just tell them, sit there, hold that. Maybe something will happen, because that again, it's pressure, isn't it? And if we feel pressure, it can be quite traumatic and definitely push us off from doing something that would otherwise be very enjoyable.
Yeah. Yeah. And you touched on there, as an angler, you're more of a lone angler. Do you like to fish predominantly or exclusively on your own? Or is there times where you do like a little bit of company on the river?
So if I know what I'm doing, and I understand the water I'm fishing, 100% want to be my own. I love it. I like being alone. I'm very happy with my own company. And it's the greatest adventure. But when it comes to learning and being mentored or guided, I haven't spent too much time with fishing guides other than on boats. And the river fishing I've done has always been pretty solitary. Obviously there's a necessity to having company, and it's the best time to learn. No matter how expert or good at something we're never going to scoff at good advice or a good lesson from somebody. So yeah, it can be pretty good. It's funny, as a teenager, the sort of carp fishing I was doing was very much social. I had a few mates that we'd go fishing with, and then gradually sort of that social group fell apart, and I stayed on the bankside. So I think it's just something, for me, it's a very, very important bit of downtime and alone time.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I've been more of a social angler, but now I enjoy the solitary aspect of it. I feel I fish a little bit better as well when I'm on my own, because I'm not chatting away. But I kind of enjoy that. Me and the dog. If it's salmon, it'd be my wife and I, and the dog as well. But yeah, I'm finding I'm more and more solitary in my fishing, and I'm kind of enjoying that aspect of it. That is, of years and years and years of standing next to people saying cast here and cast there and stuff like that. So there's probably a thing against that as well in some respects. But I'm kind of enjoying that aspect of it. So yeah, long may it continue.
Well, there's always like an apprenticeship, isn't there? There's always a process of like learning apprenticeship learning where to cast, where to fish, what the water's looking like, and where fish or presume fish are going to be holding up. That's a learning curve, and you can do it on your own, but it is a bit easier when you have someone to show you the ropes, so to speak. As I
Yeah.
said, I'm not much of a salmon fisher. I've only ever caught salmon by accident while trout fishing, and nothing that's ever been to sea and back. So I wouldn't even know where to start. The idea of a double-handed rod for me is like, oh my gosh, well, this is what am I supposed to do with that thing?
But isn't that one of the great things about it, is that there's something new to discover for you?
100%. There's so many things to discover. I hope I have the time to do it all. That's the truth of it. There's a lot to discover, and there's a lot of things that I would love to. A lot of fishing that I want to do. And not just fishing, but all things in life. But I think fishing is very much indicative of that, of the process and learning, and setting targets and reaching them. And I'm not by nature a competitive person at all. Like I'm really not. Just happy to be fishing, but to sort of set myself a challenge and set myself a goal and what I want to catch and what I want to experience. I think it's definitely a part of the fishing that I do.
Nice. That sounds absolutely perfect. And I've kept you for over an hour now, so thank you. I think that's a nice way to tie things up. And it's been wonderful getting an insight into your fishing career, into what goes into the creative process as well. And I've really, really enjoyed chatting with you this morning, Alex. Thank you so much for talking with me. Now,
thank you for talking with me.
How can people find you if they want to listen to your music, or if they want to find you on social media and stuff like that? How do people find you?
So if you type Alexander Clare without an I, on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, you'll find me. And for listening, for Spotify, Apple Music, it's just, or YouTube, just Alex Clare, AlexClare. There you go. It's it shouldn't take too long to find. Thankfully, there's quite a bit on YouTube and on Spotify. So yeah, please have a listen. Let me know what you think.
Fantastic.
Always, and if you're in a random place that I'm touring and you know of some good fishing, then I'd love people to get in touch and tell me.
Fantastic. Alex, it's been absolutely brilliant talking with you this morning. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I can feel your passion and love for life, fishing, music, and everything else. So thank you for sharing that with me this morning.
Awesome, Pete. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. This has been the Fly Culture Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. As ever, there will be plenty more coming down the line. Thanks for listening.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.